the dean loves me, or at least who's now the ex-dean. I mean, I love him. I'm sure my undergrad experience would have been fabulous at Harvard, but I'm glad that it was Columbia. New York City embraced me. Columbia embraced me. Columbia has this undergrad program for non-traditional students. It's called the School of General Studies. And it's for people who have weird, non-traditional, crazy backgrounds like me. And the average age of the students is in their late 20s. And it was the perfect fit for me. I could not have found a school that was a better fit and more supportive and more enthusiastic and embracing of me than Columbia's GS program. And that was, I still live in New York City, and I'm still involved, active with Columbia. It's my family.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. So how did MTV become involved in your story?
MTV happened after I graduated. I got an email from somebody saying, hey, we pitched this idea to MTV, and we're looking for somebody who has escaped the community, the Amish, and wants to share their story. And the title of the episode is I'm Ex-Amish, and it's part of their True Life series, MTV's True Life series, which is their documentary branch. It's not.
I think I've seen that one.
Have you really?
I think so. I used to watch a lot of MTV back when they had like music videos and other, but I think I saw this. I think I may have seen this your True Life. Okay.
Yeah. So they came to me and asked me if I would be able to help them find people or direct them in any way. And I said, well, I'd be willing to share my story. I'm writing my memoir. I want to, get some visibility, and I know all the right people anyway. I mean, I can hook you up. So they said, sure. And and all the people on there are because of me. I'm going to take the credit for it.
As well as you should.
The really wonderful thing that came out of it is that the production company, Cora Films, that was a production company that pitched it to MTV and who produced it, who I worked with, who approached me. Henry and I became very close friends. He's like a brother to me. He's just amazing. And he's just, incredible and does just amazing work. He's actually, for people who are in the documentary world, he's a protege of David Maysles of the Maysles brothers. So that means something for people in, documentary world. I mean, it's sort of, the Ivy League of documentary filmmaking sort of legacy. So, yeah. So, it was definitely a very good experience for me.
Wonderful. And then, so you said you just mentioned in your book while you were in the process of writing at the time. What made you want to write a book and tell your story?
Before I left, when I was maybe around between 11, 13 years old, something like that, I wanted to write a book about my story. I felt that this is what I would do just as a natural part of my trajectory if I made it in the world outside. And the reason specifically later on became to talk about the sexual assaults that I experienced from two of my uncles. The ones that I mentioned earlier who helped me escape, both of them raped me repeatedly. Immediately after I stayed at their houses. So this happened for the first year after my escape. And the first uncle, Harvey Bell, was in Montana, told me the day after the first occurrence that if you ever tell anyone, I'm going to kill you. And that is what bought my silence for 13 years. I knew that I had no doubt on my mind that he'd kill me or send someone after me if he suspected that I'd tell anyone. So when I managed to escape from his house and go to my uncle Enos Bontrager in Wisconsin, I thought I was safe there, and the same thing happened there with him. And I couldn't report him because, Harv would find out about it and send someone after to kill me. I mean, that was the fear that kept me from saying anything. And I knew that the only way I could talk about it would be through a book, because I didn't feel that anybody would be able to really help me. My experience had been that if I went to somebody to try to talk about my issues growing up, like the traumas and abuses, everybody was always fascinated about, the Amish, it's like kind of like being a celebrity where it's like, you're this celebrity and people are fascinated because they think you're, this, it's sort of like that branding of it. And they can't see beyond that image to see that you're a human being. You're a person like anyone else with your own pains and sorrows and challenges. So that was what made me feel like I couldn't ever talk about what happened except through a book. Mm-hmm. And then when I started writing the book, which was right after I graduated, I hit a wall when I realized that I couldn't even think the word rape. How was I going to write the word if I couldn't even think it? I mean, that traumatized me, re-traumatized me. Mm-hmm. And that just, for a couple of years, I was a complete mess, a complete wreck. Like, that's a whole other episode or story about what it's like to live in New York, like couch surfing and doing coke and all of that kind of stuff. And I mean, like it was, like horrible. And it was all a product of, the PTSD, the traumatization, not feeling like anyone was there to support me, not knowing how to find anyone. And Henry, back to MTV and the Cora Films producer, he is the first person I told about what happened. Like, after working with him over the course of quite a, several months, maybe almost a year, however long the production was, I told him at the end, okay, this is what happened to me. And it took that long for me to build up that trust. And he put me in touch with some really amazing people in New York City who were able to help me and all of that. So yeah, he's definitely a brother.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So after then you published your book, I guess what happened in between you graduating from Columbia and then you starting your own, because right now you do consulting work with, is it trauma victims or is it?
Yes.
Sexual harassment, sexual assault survivors. So what was the journey like in between you graduating and then you getting involved in this work?
That was a long period of time. I graduated in 2007, and I didn't actually end up publishing my book until 2017, 10 years later, my memoir. It took that long. And I started a podcast in the beginning of 2017, February of 2017, and the idea was to find other survivors of sexual assault. But at that time, I couldn't even use the word sexual assault. I had to use trauma because people were not receptive to that word. This was before the Me Too movement. So the Me Too movement took off in October of 2017. I launched that podcast in February of that year, just ahead of my memoir. What I realized as a marketing professional, my background is in, marketing consulting. I did it for clients in New York and elsewhere throughout those 10 years as well. And I realized that I could market my memoir for a couple of years, but at the end of the day, people are just going to say, oh, it's an isolated incident. Oh, it really doesn't happen. Oh, this really doesn't happen among the Amish. I mean, that's an anomaly, blah, 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 blah. So I thought, okay, well, if I have a podcast that every week a new story is coming out from a survivor, you can't not deny. I mean, you just can't ignore that. Right. And so I began I did find some other Amish survivors and escapees and people who left the church. And I also found lots of entrepreneurs who were willing to talk about their traumas. Again, most of them did not say that they were assaulted, but some of them did. And it was always pitched to them as, what kind of traumatic things have you overcome or whatever. And then after Me Too, everybody was willing to acknowledge it. It's no longer an issue. So it's very interesting to see that. And now, in 2018, the idea was to focus on just getting sexual assault survivors' memoirs out to help them, talk about their survivor experiences. So in terms of the memoir, genre, there's nobody that I have found, or at least not as of several months ago or whenever I first started it, nobody specializes in helping those who've survived from assault. And that's a different kind of sort of like, you need this emotional support from a coach or mentor who's been through it. And that's kind of, my specialty is just helping people get their voice back and own their traumas.
Sure. Oh, good. And then, so I know you mentioned this earlier, but so when did you start the Amish Heritage Foundation, and what made you want to start that and do that nonprofit work?
So that's another thing that's a product of one of my childhood vows. It's like these things just don't leave me alone.
I guess not.
And when I was a little kid, and I say a teenager, around 13 or so, I read The Underground Railroad about Harriet Tubman. So that was my first female hero. There are no female heroes in Amish culture, none. And I found Harriet Tubman. I was very inspired by her, and I thought, once again, if I'm successful, I'll create a system like this, because there's nothing that exists to help those who don't want to be inside the church to transition outside successfully. Mm-hmm. And the plan had not been to start the nonprofit this year. The plan was, I'm going on my book tour and I'm helping others talk about their stories and write their stories. But the nonprofit it decided it wanted to come first. And so I actually got a call or an email in around February of this year from Elam Zook, who's my nonprofit partner. And he grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And he said, Torah, are you still planning on doing this nonprofit? Because I'm sick of trying to get my voice heard inside the academic community here, and just wondering if you want to do something with me. And I'm like, hell yes. I've been working on him for 6 years. It was 6 years trying to get him to partner up with me, because he's the only person I have found who was able to talk about the issues and relate to convey the issues to those outside the communities,
sure,
as well as inside. So that's a difficult bridge. And that's, I came to Lancaster and we did this little thing where, I sat down and said, well, hypothetically, what would a conference look like if we were to do a conference? Let's just, imagine what that might be. And he thought it was hypothetical, and I knew it was. And before we knew it, we have these amazing speakers who just said yes and agreed to support us, and it's just been phenomenal. And that actually is an example of why I wanted to go to an Ivy League school, which is what you had asked earlier, why an Ivy League? For some reason, somehow, I understood that what I was paying for wasn't as much the education. I mean, you can get a very good education in top tier schools. It's really about the name and the network. Mm-hmm. So if you can figure out how to leverage that, that's what you're paying for. And getting this amazing lineup of speakers, like a Pulitzer-nominated author and attorney, a member on the Council of Foreign Relations, to, both of them, one is speaking on Friday, delivering the keynote, the other on Saturday.